The voice of rugby league, Rabsy Ray Warren, joins me right now. G'day, Ray. How are you?
Good, Rick. Thank you.
Mate, it's good to have the Asada saga behind us, mate. You know, what's your take on all that?
Well, I don't think it's behind us, Rick, to be quite frank with you. I understand that they've handed down a 12-month suspension, albeit backdated, and not too many people are happy with that. It was like a slap on the wrist. But at the end of the day, it hasn't been ratified, as far as I know, by WADA. So what you've got to understand, what is the construction of all of this? You've firstly got the world body, which is WADA, and then the members of WADA are people like ASADA, and they administrate over each country. And then, of course, you have sporting bodies like the NRL who then adopt the rules laid down by ASADA. So that's the framework. Now, ASADA gave the players to understand that it would be okay by the ruling body, WADA. But I haven't heard anything official from them to say, yes, they're happy to accept what ASADA has handed down. The other thing is that we haven't yet finished with is that ASADA, I think, are continuing their investigations into the coaching staff at Cronulla. Because you've got to understand that Flanagan was suspended, and so was Elkin, by the NRL for lack of due diligence. Now, ASADA might think, well, that's not severe enough, given that they were in charge of the club at the time. They might demand, and I think the maximum penalty can be 4 years.
In other words, watch this space.
I think so, Rick. You know, I'm not trying to be a pessimist, but at the end of the day, it's important that everybody knows the construction and how it operates. And I'm certainly not convinced it's over just yet. You know, in fact, I think there's a very good chance that the coaching staff might have something to answer for over and above whatever suspensions the NRL impose themselves. I mean, ASADA might say, well, we think that you've gone a bit light on them, and maybe the NRL will agree. You see, it happened under Shane Flanagan's watch. Some people could say, well, what about the CEO? Isn't it his watch? The point is that Cronulla was a club in shambles and disarray. There was no CEO. And that's why this case is a little bit different than any other case. There was no, if you like, chairman of the board. There was no CEO.
Yeah, okay, so there's a lot of grey. That's what I suppose you're saying, aren't
you? I think that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, all right, mate. And
I'm making the point to you, it's a very difficult subject for me to understand, and so it's probably difficult for everybody to understand.
Yeah, and that's why it's, I suppose, a little unclear. Anyway, let's move on from that one. Last week, there were two massive upsets that not many people saw coming. Parramatta doing Manly and the Cowboys doing South Sydney. What do you make on those two games?
Oh, well, I always expect the Cowboys are going to cause a problem wherever they play, and they got them and they beat them in their own backyard, which is a massive performance. And then I saw South Sydney last night, and I thought, well, hang on a second. They've peaked against Manly about 3 or 4 weeks ago at the cricket ground, and since then, against the Cowboys, they were horrible, and last night they were terrible. But even so, they won the game. But it wasn't the South Sydney side that I saw beat Manly about 3 weeks ago. So I think what has happened here, the Cowboys are coming good at the right time, and I think they have got a real chance of winning not only this weekend, which is an absolute no-brainer, and then they play Manly at home. They can beat them too. They can go right up the ladder, the Cowboys, and Parramatta. Well, they're not surprising anybody. I mean, on their night, they can beat anybody, particularly at home.
And months ago, you said look out for the Sydney Roosters in your crystal ball, and they're coming good at the moment.
Yeah, well, that's me with my crystal balls, Rick, you know. I've been using the crystal balls for a long time. But, yeah, look, I kept saying to you and to anybody that wanted to listen, don't dismiss last year's premiers. I think they are a big event team. I was reminded of that on Anzac Day when they played that Anzac Day match against the Dragons. Now, the Dragons, they mightn't be everybody's number one team, but they're not a bad team. But it was in front of 35,000 people. And I don't know about Frank Sinatra and those sort of people, but it seemed to me that when they're on the big stage, Elton John and those sort of people, they perform better, or they perform at their best, and they give a bit more. And I think there's a bit of that in the Sydney Roosters. They become more cocky, I think. on the big stage. So watch out for them. I'm still not prepared to think that last year's grand final won't be repeated.
Yeah, although Manly seem to have run out a bit of gas.
Yeah, I'm not denying that, but I've been around long enough to know that Manly, they seem to book a space on grand final day more than most other clubs, you know.
They certainly do. You're in Brisbane at the moment, and we have the Broncos up against St George Illawarra. How do you think that's going to unfold before our eyes tonight?
I think Brisbane will win. Their record here against St George is very, very strong. I think they've beaten them the last 6 times I think they've played, something like that. In fact, I don't think the Dragons have won here since 2009. I'm fairly certain Brisbane will win. And really, looking at the points for and against, it's probably better off that they do win, because these two have both only got a slim chance of making the 8. But the one with the better for and against, and that's Brisbane, will have a better chance if it comes down to points for and against.
Well, that's what it's all about. I tell you what, it's been a fantastic comp this year with how close it is from basically.
Yeah. Don't forget, they're only on 26 points, these two. So, you know, they've both got to win their last 2 matches. Now, that's impossible because they're playing tonight.
Well, that's
so
exactly.
Tonight is really the start of the finals. It's sudden death.
Yeah, it certainly is.
But I'm not against the Dragons, don't get me wrong. I love the Dragons. But at the end of the day, it's probably a very big miracle for St George to make it, whereas Brisbane, because they've got a good points for and against, if they happen to get into a shootout on 30 points with somebody else, they can probably jump in on percentages. But they've both got to win their last 2 matches. Let's not forget that. And Brisbane, they play Melbourne in Melbourne next weekend. Yeah,
tough assignment to do that. How's the book going for you? You're off to a book signing as we speak.
Yeah. I don't know whether you've got any copies up there in the New England, but it's gone like a bonfire. Believe me, I can't believe it. I'm flattered. I'm humbled. It's been #1 non-fiction bestseller across Australia, and really all it is just an old bloke telling the story about a dream of a kid from the country with that dream, and he's lived the dream ever since for about 64 years.
Well, I've spoken to someone who used to play in the old Wednesday night MK Cup, an old player, Richard Thornton, apparently back for Penrith, and he's one of the locals here, and he absolutely loves it. He said to say g'day and tell you that it's a magic bit of work.
Well, I think he's exaggerating when he says it's a magic bit of work, but it's... Look, there's a few yarns in there that I think people will like, but I said to you the other day, it talks about where I come from, a very humble background, I was a little kid who dreamt of being a sports commentator, and we trace that career, and there's a few other things in there that are sad and all the rest of it. And then, of course, there's been a few things happen for me in the last few years that are monumental things like a statue, and then just last Tuesday, I was one of the first 15 media men inducted into the Sydney Cricket Ground Hall of Fame, and of the 15, only 4 of us are alive. So that's not in the book because it only happened last Tuesday.
There you go. Mate, thank you very much for your time. Look forward to chatting with you next week.
All right, Rick, I'll talk